Can't hear me.
Amen.
Do you want me to start again, guys?
Yes.
Black Americans. Okay. For 3 days, ministers preached to a rapt audience about the Bible, family values, work ethics, and
Can you turn it
No,
up?
turn it up.
Turn it up.
Milton talked publicly about a silent killer, an epidemic, familiar but forgotten, that today is hitting Black Americans in stunning and disproportionate numbers. AIDS. What's that?
The epidemic has not ended in the United States. It's only changed in who it impacts.
Black people make up 13% of the U.S. population, but over 50% of all new cases of HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. That infection rate is 8 times the rate of whites.
In America, AIDS is virtually a black disease by every measure.
Black women are 23 times more likely to be diagnosed with AIDS than white women.
We should be in the streets. Everybody should be in the streets. Everybody should be freaked out.
As of 2004, more than 200,000 African Americans have died. Still, despite these stunning statistics, AIDS is a topic that remains underground in Black America.
Silence is not suicide. The Black American silence on this issue is suicide.
In the future, people will look back at our generation and say, what were they thinking?
Good evening. I'm Terry Moran. There are times in the news when we're not watching or listening closely enough, when we miss a story, a big, important story that goes underreported, mostly ignored. This is one of those stories. Let me give you one more statistic. AIDS is the leading cause of death among Black American women ages 25 to 44, and it has been for 11 years. Last year, Peter Jennings began this report, and some of his work appears later in this program. It is my privilege to have picked up where Peter left off. Now, in the course of our reporting on this crisis, we discovered 5 important reasons that AIDS among African Americans is out of control. And as we explore them tonight, we'll talk about sex and race, neglect and denial. It's all certain to make some people uncomfortable. But this crisis demands attention now. The first reason AIDS is out of control among African Americans is ignorance. Ignorance among people in power. Ignorance among people who should know better. Take a look at this. In October 2004, when Vice President Dick Cheney and Democratic challenger John Edwards took the stage to debate, moderator Gwen Ifill asked them this question.
Mr. Vice President, in particular, I want to talk to you about AIDS. And not about AIDS in China or Africa, but AIDS right here in this country, where Black women between the ages of 25 and 44 are 13 times more likely to die of the disease than their counterparts. What should the government's role be?
When you asked it of the Vice President, what were you expecting?
You know, I really was expecting that he'd have an answer. I was expecting that both of them would say this is something we must address, and in my administration we will.
Well, this is a great tragedy. When you think about the enormous cost here in the United States and around the world of the AIDS epidemic, I had not heard those numbers with respect to African American women. I was not aware that it was that severe an epidemic there.
I was surprised and frustrated because of the constraints of the debate. I couldn't say, what? I couldn't say, how can that be, Mr. Vice President? And I was equally surprised that the Democrat had no answer.
Senator Radford, 90 seconds.
Yes, well, first with respect to what's happening in Africa and Russia and other places around the world.
Senator Edwards didn't seem to know much about the epidemic in Black America either.
The AIDS epidemic in Africa, which is killing millions and millions of people.
What kind of reaction did you get afterwards?
The reaction I got from folks in the black community who said, what does this mean? Don't they care about us?
The fact that you asked about AIDS in America and they answered about Africa is almost proof of just how invisible the issue is.
Well, a lot of Americans are of the opinion that the problem's solved, that it's not an issue to talk about domestically anymore.
But it's not just white leaders who talk a lot more about AIDS in Africa than at home. Many black American leaders and celebrities have gone off to fight the disease a continent away.
Wear a condom and protect yourself. It's just easier because they can go and take a vacation, see the giraffes and the zebras. You know, I can go in the village and I can touch the people and I can have my emotional moment and I can get on my plane and I can fly back home and say I addressed HIV/AIDS and therefore I don't have to do it anymore.
And what has happened with the globalization of the AIDS fight is that it has been a false choice because we have to deal with all of it. And what kind of credibility can we have when we go to sub-Saharan Africa or Eastern Europe or Asia when we can't even solve the problem with folks that we see and work with every single day?
Last year, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta announced that for the first time, more than 1 million Americans are infected with HIV. Almost half of them are black.
As a scientist, you've been working on HIV/AIDS from just about the beginning.
Yes.
Almost a quarter century. Did you see this coming in the black American community?
Yes. You could see it coming. All you have to do is just sit down and think about it in pure, cold, infectious disease terms. It's a infectious disease that's transmitted by sexual contact, both homosexual sex, men who have sex with men, heterosexual contact, and injection drug use. So the handwriting was on the wall for quite a long time.
If the government's most important AIDS scientists could see this crisis coming so clearly, why has there been no government policy or program aimed specifically at stopping the epidemic in black America? In fact, some government policies have made the problem worse. And that brings us to the second reason the African American epidemic has gotten out of control: government failure. AIDS first took hold in the black community 25 years ago, in the inner cities, among addicts shooting intravenous drugs.
The first time when I did it, somebody kept telling me you should try it, you will like it. And he put the drugs in me, and I'm 17 years old, and he did this to me.
Addicts sharing needles with other addicts spread the disease fast before anyone really understood that this was a way to get infected.
My mother, she passed away from HIV.
Sad as it seems, though.
Then in the 1980s came the war on drugs, new state and federal laws that unintentionally sent the epidemic into overdrive. The war on drugs meant sending thousands more street-level drug offenders to prison. Men were more likely to be infected with HIV from dirty needles. Since 1980, the U.S. prison population has quadrupled.
We're doing mass incarcerations of black men in America. More college-age black men are in prison than are in college. Many of them go into prison HIV negative, come out HIV positive, and we don't have a strategy to deal with this.
Prisons are notorious breeding grounds for HIV. Infection rates are 5 times higher than outside the walls. Sex between men in prison has been the subject of only a handful of studies, but one study by a national police organization found that at least 40% of inmates had had sex with another man in prison. And despite strong evidence that condoms reduce the spread of AIDS, they are forbidden in all federal and most state and local prisons.
To make condoms available in prison would be to admit that sex occurs in prison. And for some reason, the prisons don't want to say that happens. But if we want to encourage HIV transmission, it's the perfect policy. I think that would be the way to do it.
In most prisons, testing is voluntary. AIDS activists say that's because if an inmate tests positive, he has a right